In the article titled Debunking the Myths About Training Load, Injury and Performance by Tim Gabbett, published in the British Journal of Sports Medicine, 5 common myths about training load and its role in injury and performance were discussed, which were: load explains all injuries, the 10% rule, avoid spikes and troughs at all costs, 1.5 is the magic acute chronic workload ratio, and it's all about the ratio. This presentation, brought to you by Talking Sports Science, will be a summary of those 5 myths. In part, higher training loads are generally associated with better performance. Equally, inappropriately prescribed training load may increase injury risk, so a view that load explains all injuries is rather short-sighted, as adaptations to training are influenced either positively or negatively by various factors, such as academic and emotional stress, and a lack of sleep. For example, athletes on average who sleep fewer than 8 hours per night have 1.7 times greater risk of being injured compared to those who get their 8 hours in. Clearly, the training, performance and injury relationship is more complex than just load. Another popular myth, particularly in endurance sports, is that training load should not exceed 10% each week. Although rapid changes in training load increase the risk of injury, there is no 10% rule, as optimal load increases are likely dependent on chronic load. For example, smaller weekly increases in training load are recommended when the chronic load is extremely low or extremely high, indicated here by the red blocks. Whereas larger increases in weekly training load are likely to be well tolerated by athletes with moderate to high chronic load, and may even be necessary to accelerate the rehabilitation process, indicated here by the green blocks. Therefore, limiting training load increases to 10% per week is at best a guideline rather than a code. Across a wide range of sports, rapid increases, i.e. spikes in workload, have been associated with increased injury risk. The acute chronic workload ratio, also known as training stress balance, is the size of the current week's training load, i.e. acute training load, in relation to longer term training load, i.e. chronic training load. When the acute chronic workload ratio is within the range of 0.8 to 1.3, in other words, the acute training load is approximately equal to the chronic training load, the risk of injury has been found to be relatively low. However, when the acute chronic workload ratio is 1.5 or above, i.e. the acute training load is much greater than the chronic training load, the risk of injury noticeably increases. The phrase, risk does not equal rate, helps to make it clear that just because an athlete is at risk, even high risk, the event may not occur. Although it's intuitive that large spikes in workload increase injury risk, it's possible that too little training, i.e. troughs, may also increase injury risk. So although spikes and troughs in workload may increase injury risk, they should not always be avoided because variability within training is important, and they may also be necessary to elicit greater physiological adaptations to improve performance. It's important to recognise that acute chronic workload ratio of 1.5 is not a magic number. As mentioned before, increased risk does not guarantee injury will occur, as one single training monitoring variable is unable to predict injury events. Even using a range of training load variables is only able to predict non-contact injuries slightly better than what might be obtained by simply random chance. The difference between robust and fragile athletes following a spike in workload can largely be explained by moderators of the workload-injury relationship. Example moderators include age, training, physical fitness, and injury history, which act to either increase or decrease injury risk at a given workload. So instead of solely relying on the acute chronic workload ratio, it's recommended to stratify players according to the known moderators, as well as interpret any internal and external load variables in combination with well-being and physical readiness data. The acute chronic workload ratio has been widely embraced. However, it's not all about the ratio, because what is often overlooked is the protective effect of chronic training load. In several sports, for example rugby, football, American football and cricket, spikes in workload can increase injury risk. However, players with greater chronic workloads have been found to have a lower risk of injury than those with low chronic workloads, indicating that exposure to load allows the body to tolerate load, and training develops the physical qualities, for example strength, that are associated with a reduced injury risk. And that concludes the 5 common myths and misconceptions about training load and its role in injury and performance. As always, I recommend you check out the full article. The link is in the description. Thanks for listening, folks. See you next time.